So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leading Ladies podcast here at GreenKite. I have the pleasure today of welcoming my friend Claire, who has a company called Imagine Beyond, which I'm going to get her to tell you about in a moment. We're going to be looking at sort of entrepreneurial leadership, changing mindsets, and also linking AI into that. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is where AI fits into that leadership mindset in a small company, because I get it in big companies, I think, and how it can impact and having a positive impact on a business. But for smaller companies, I'm not sure I understand how that world can help a small business, if I'm honest. So maybe we can sort of talk about that as well. But Claire, please introduce yourself and tell us about Imagine Beyond and how, because you are an entrepreneur and a female leader of your business, and that'd be really great to hear about that first of all.
Oh, well, thank you, Karen, for the opportunity to come and speak with you on your podcast. Imagine Beyond is 5 years old this year. Prior to that, if I just give you a very quick bit of background, so 25 years in business. The first decade was in the creative industries and client and growth and consultancy-based roles, working in quite entrepreneurial environments, I have to say, when I look back. I trained to be a coach in 2012 and have been coaching and mentoring ever since then. At that time, I discovered a tiny startup who were on a mission to teach the world to code, and joined them as the 7th employee and was part of growing them into a global business over 6 years before setting up Imagine Beyond. And so that experience really opened my eyes to the world of technology and actually how important it is for us all, whether we're leaders, running businesses or leading teams, how important it is really to get a grasp on the opportunities that technology can bring. So much of all of that experience has fed into what I do now at Imagine Beyond, which is about helping leaders to really tap into that entrepreneurial mindset to navigate uncertainty and change, especially in the world that we're in now as AI is starting to really accelerate within business.
Okay, because I think that's an interesting combination for me, and when we've spoken before, you've got that creative side, and then I think there's a sort of a potential for you to think that coding is very technical, but actually when you talk about it, and I hope we can get into that, about how creative it can be, I think that's an interesting combination that I don't think people fully appreciate. It's sort of almost can be siloed away, can't it? That sort of advantages of tech and coding and AI. It sits in certain parts of the business where it should be perhaps positioned in others. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting kind of sweet spot that we're in right now. And if we look back through humankind, we've always created tools to advance us. If you go all the way back to our ancestors, prehistoric man developed tools in flint, didn't we, to enhance our survival and progress. The industrial era, we enabled machinery and engineering to have all the standards of living and change the way that we lived. And more recently, in the digital knowledge era, with the birth of the World Wide Web and the internet sort of 20, 30 years ago, that has meant that we have access to information at our fingertips and also the ability to communicate globally, which 30 years ago we'd never have the opportunity to do. And the sweet spot now is that actually so much of the opportunity is dependent on what we can imagine. The technology is so fantastic in many ways that it's really up to us as the human beings to tap into our imagination, to think where's the potential, where's the opportunity in this. So that's why I get really excited.
And I think when I talk to you, you always talk about AI as a positive thing, that it could have, and not the negative things, because I think we, in danger just as individuals, of positioning AI and social media, however we want to talk about it, that access to our world can be sort of quite negative. So I'm really interested that we talk about the positives and that we sort of look at, the themes that I've spoken about before, particularly with Sarah, who was very entrepreneurial, the CEO of GreenKite. The challenges facing entrepreneurs, women in particular, setting up businesses and leading them themselves. What brought you to that point of setting your own up? What drove you to do that?
A burning desire to create something of my own.
And had that been a slow burn, Claire, to get to that point? Or had it been sort of something you think, at one point I'm going to do it, or did you sort of come across that realisation that you wanted to create your own thing
Yeah, do you know what? I love that question, Karen. Thank you for asking me that, because it was a bit of a slow burn.
Okay.
And it was only when I look back across my whole career that I can connect the dots, much like Steve Jobs talks about in his Stanford speech. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. It's so true, because if I go all the way back to my childhood, actually my surname, Koryczan, comes from my Polish grandfather who came to England after the war and was a small business owner. So he set up his own business here and was very successful. And my dad, my late father, also had his own very small business. So without even realizing it, I grew up in a very entrepreneurial, and I sort of saw it as creative rather than entrepreneurial, but actually learning through osmosis about the importance of being customer centric, overcoming obstacles by finding a way, not seeing challenges as a block, but seeing it as an opportunity, being curious, like all of these things kind of were right from my formative years. And the choices that I've made, I've worked in a global corporate early in my career, and then have tended to work with more independent founder-led businesses since then, but have worked with the FTSE 100s, the Fortune 500. So very much understand the differences around culture and mindset within those areas. So it's always been the thread.
It's interesting. And I think you talked about lessons that you've learned. They're implicit lessons. They're not explicitly taught to you, are they? They sort of leach into you, sort of, don't they? As
Definitely.
As some that you learn from and that you automatically do because that's the environment that you've been brought up in, those lessons that you've learned there. And I think you're right, you look back on them and you think, I understand where I got all that drive from. And it's just been there. So when you talk to business leaders, is there commonality between challenges that business leaders are facing in big corporates and smaller businesses, founder-led businesses? Do you find yourself talking to them in a different way because of their environment, because it's a big corporate, has specific problems? Or is there a common thread between them in terms of what they're trying to face, big or small?
I mean, I think there's always a common thread around growth, competitive advantage, and finding amazing talent to help. I think they're kind of common all the way through. I suppose what's different in terms of the small businesses is that they have much less resources and budget to be able to do things. So by their very nature, tend to be more creative and agile in their approach. Whereas the big organizations having that resource to be able to invest in certain things and the scale are much more complex. Rather than doing company-wide initiatives, often organizations will look to pilot things in a particular organization or a particular team. So they start small and then grow from there. I mean, having an open mind is really key in all of that at leadership, and not having that fixed mindset. This is where the entrepreneurial leadership way of leading is very helpful within business, whether it's a small business or large corporate, because the qualities, the behaviors of that mindset, the accessible behaviors like curiosity, customer centricity, agility, all of those things are innate in all of us, whether we work in a big or small environment. And it's those behaviors that really help us to see the opportunity and navigate whatever is on the road ahead.
So that sort of open mindset is very challenging, isn't it? Because I don't know if this is something that you see or whether I'm just talking complete rubbish, but time is a huge factor for businesses, whether they're big or small.
Yes.
And the time to be able to do things and the time to be able to have that open mindset. Is that something that you see the people you talk to struggle with, creating that time?
Oh my goodness, definitely.
And is there a different way of thinking or operating? And maybe this is where, if you have the opportunity, you can look to bring in different kind of solutions. Be they AI, be they... I mean, I'm just trying to link about creativity, mindsets, how we try to use what's available to us, which, as you say, is just off the charts now. So how could people start to have that open mindset, use their time more valuably, and understand how valuable time is?
Yeah. And you've hit the nail right on the head there, Karen, around time. I think that is definitely another common thread, that every single organisation is time poor, because we're moving at such a rapid rate, trying to keep up with everything, trying to remain competitive, all of those things. And what's really interesting about AI, particularly tools like generative AI, is that actually that can free up a lot of a leader's time. So things like drafting emails, things like summarizing reports, getting insights and recommendations. Generative AI platforms like ChatGPT and Copilot, which there are free versions for, that anyone can access, can really help to do that in seconds rather than minutes or hours, which it would take us to digest and interpret information like that. So that is brilliant in terms of what that can enable us to do, but also coming up with different ideas. So even just asking the question, can you give me 5 ideas for this particular problem? ChatGPT or Copilot can come up with a whole plethora of different things. So it's almost thinking about it as a tool to collaborate with. And I think that's where the sweet spot around where we are right now gets really interesting, because actually in this imagination age that we're in, we're able to collaborate with these intelligent systems to really enhance and accelerate and find new ways of progress.
That's really interesting, because I would say, just listening to you say that, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't do any of that. Right? And I consider myself to be a really big supporter of tech and change and so on. And I'm thinking, there must be so many things that I do in the role I have as a non-exec for companies now. There must be things that I could be doing just as an individual to make my life easier. And I'm going to go away and I'm going to take this as a lesson and go away and try and think about that, because there's also a part of me that thinks, one of the companies I'm involved in is a huge US company. They've got divisions that look at it. They're using things like ChatGPT, experimenting how they use it in the business. And I'm not sure, if I look at it at the other end of the scale with GreenKite, very entrepreneurial, I'm not sure that, we think about business strategy. We talk about servicing our clients well. We hire great people. But, I'm sure one of my colleagues there is going to say, well, actually, can we do that? I don't know. But I'm not sure that for a small business, we think about using it that way. I could be wrong. And there might be people that contact would say, actually, we do all the time, Karen, you're just being a bit of an arse about this. But I just think there's some real lessons to be learned here, isn't there? It's not just big company stuff. It's for individuals and for small companies.
It is.
And to help you navigate change and manage your own time. It's on different levels, isn't it?
It is. And it is whatever we want it to be. And that's
almost too scary, though.
Yeah, it is.
Claire, I would say that it's whatever you want it to be. Like, and it's that starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, how have you seen people arrive at, get to that starting point? What does that look like for some people, do you think?
Yeah.
Is it suddenly I've got to find a way, I'm just going to try this?
Yeah.
Is
Definitely. So I did a talk recently where I encouraged everyone to start to experiment with some of these platforms and just put in that. So a couple of minutes beforehand, they'd done an exercise in pairs where they'd talked about a business challenge and they'd brainstormed together. And then I asked them to apply the same question to a platform like ChatGPT or Copilot. And it was really interesting kind of seeing some of the things that came out of that experiment, the human kind of creative, collaborative aspect at the beginning, and then the AI-powered aspect as well. And so things like that can just be very helpful.
Was there a difference in what was produced, or was there a thread? Was there commonality?
There was difference and commonality. But with generative AI, you can dig a bit deeper. So you can ask for 5 examples of something and then say, okay, give me a rationale as to why these are not so good, and then provide 5 better versions of that.
Okay. So I'm sitting here listening to you, and I find this really fascinating. We'll get on to some of the other stuff I really want to cover about how people can reimagine their businesses and, and managing change in this sort of fast-moving world. Alexa. That's AI, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But I don't think of it as AI. I think of it, I might, ask Alexa to put the lights on, or play the top 5 so-and-sos. But it's the same thing, isn't it? But I don't think, maybe we compartmentalise our lives and our businesses, that's in our home there. But actually, as we're wandering around thinking, could you just tell me 5 really interesting things about X? As you're wandering around. I love talking to you about this, because you do make me challenge myself about how I just sort of potter through life a little bit and need to think about how these things could make my life easier in all sorts of ways.
So, for example, on a personal level, I'll give you an example. High schools for for my
Okay.
my little one. You can do research. So ask, and it's very, very important that you say in real time when you command and you prompt. So give me an example of in real time of.
Okay. So maybe at some point that we could come back to the outcome of that in a minute. But at some point as we go through this podcast, can you give us some tips about like that's really useful? I would never have known that there in real time. Probably loads of people do, but I would never have thought, I must say, in real time.
Yeah.
Did it help you?
It really did, because it gave me local schools, ones further away. It gave me the Ofsted reports. It gave me, loads of data that it would have taken me days and weeks to trowel through the internet.
That's fantastic.
And that is the beauty of using platforms like this, because it can process information like in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Whereas it would take us a lot longer to go through that process.
But okay.
That's right.
I think this is definitely a lesson learned for me. Okay, but at some point, some tips around that would be really useful. But, we're talking about sort of preparing yourself, your companies, big or small, for change. Some businesses can be quite rigid in terms of their reporting lines, and so they're trying to move and change in what can be a very rigid structure of a company. So what would you say to people are some things to think about as they navigate through those changes? And I'm a big change fan, actually, but I know a lot of people aren't. Maybe tell us why as well. I think that would be really interesting.
I love the challenge. The challenge to myself personally, because as human beings, if you think about how the brain works, 2% body mass, 20% of our energy it takes. So anything that it can do to conserve energy, to make things predictable and certain, it will. So it always wants to keep us in that place of certainty and predictability. I like the challenge of change because it actually forces us into a position of having to think differently, or to learn new things, or to grow and progress, because the default for the brain will try and take us back to certainty and predictability. Okay. So that's kind of the personal...
No, that's very interesting. Keep going. I'll come back to a point on that in a minute.
And I think just recognising in business, in the way that we work, that is the default for human beings.
Certainty.
Predictability, because of how the brain operates, and that it always wants to conserve as much energy as possible. And when we are doing things that are uncertain, like change very often is, it can send us into panic, which is just outside the comfort zone, isn't it? We've got that comfort zone of predictability and certainty, which feels lovely, and we know what to expect and all of those comfortable, amazing things. Just outside of that is the panic zone, where something new has happened or change is happening. And it can often feel very, very uncomfortable and scary, because there's so many unknowns, and we might have to learn new things, and we might feel like an imposter. We might think, I don't know how to do this. And the more senior that we become, there is an expectation that we have all the answers for everything. The reality is that how can we have all the answers when things are changing so rapidly?
Does that link back into your leadership feelings about having an open mindset? So when you're expecting people and putting them into these change situations, that you need to be aware of that level, how uncomfortable people are feeling in that space. I think one of the things that I struggled with is saying, I don't know the answer to that. I can find it out, but I don't know. That expectation you mentioned there about people expecting you to know, and feeling it's a weak to say, well, actually, I don't know that. I can do it. I'll find out a way of doing it, and I can come up with a solution, but I don't know the answer right now. And I think people can be quite wary of saying that because of a feeling that it diminishes how people may see them and their skill sets from a professional perspective.
And that's also what's going on in the inner narrative as well. You put that pressure on yourself. You expect yourself to be able to know everything at that particular level.
And I think coming back to the point we spoke about earlier, from an individual basis, some of the stuff that you talked about earlier, using generative AI in a particular way, can possibly help us as individuals.
Yeah, it definitely can.
And I hadn't really thought about it. I think we see it possibly as business tools, not personal tools.
It's both. It's definitely both. So from a business perspective, even just asking, act as a coach, and here's a bit of context about my business. This is what I do. And, how can generative AI help me grow my business? Just a simple question like that.
Yes.
Can give you the thought starter for some ideas for how you can start to apply using this technology.
Yeah.
And then from the personal perspective, obviously I shared that example about research.
It's terrific.
But yeah, just simple things like that can save so much time.
And have you seen in your experience when you're in with companies and you're providing this insight and challenge to them through a change management program or just strategically with people, are there some areas that you find that people aren't willing to go because that is just too challenging for them to think about? And so automatically you set yourself up for failure if you're not prepared to be open.
Yes, definitely. And so much of that is linked to the organisational culture.
Okay.
Yeah. And the environment. So a lot of what we're talking about is innovation, isn't it? It's very hard. It's about progress. It's about competitive advantage. It's about continuous improvement, which is what all of this is about. And so from a cultural perspective, if there isn't that openness and willingness to support and encourage those types of endeavours that enable experimentation and innovation, then it's going to be very hard to swim against the tide. So you might have small pockets of people in certain areas like marketing and sales might be a bit more experimental than legal and compliance, for example. The organisational culture is going to have an impact on that.
I think that's interesting because I was just sitting here thinking about silos, because I think we have these things sitting in silos, don't we? So IT and change sits there. So we're actually, that AI mindset sort of acceptance of it should perhaps run across the whole business.
Yeah, it really should. And there's a beautiful opportunity to foster more collaboration with tools like this that can help, because AI is not going away. In the same way that digital 15, 20 years ago, people were saying, oh, it's just a fad. Actually, it's not. It's here to stay, and it's on the rise in terms of that hockey stick, in terms of growth. So it's about how we can utilise these tools to really foster greater levels of collaboration, even just coming together across different departments to have a conversation about how you can work together or how you can start to experiment with these different tools. Getting different perspectives in can be very, very helpful as well.
And I presume if you start to look at this helps people start to reimagine what their business could look like.
That's right. Yeah.
Potentially be a bit more focused, faster, a bit more reactive, quicker to react.
Or able to predict. Because if you think about AI, it's all data. Historical data, mind you. If we're talking about AI, generative AI obviously is pulling from all of that data to come up with solutions for you, and that can be future focused. Yeah, the ability to be able to harness lots of data sets and to be able to look back and then predict what could happen in the future can be very helpful. And
so if you were sitting here with people listening into this, are there some basics that and I know we're talking about AI a lot as well, which is something I wanted to bring in, but not necessarily make it about the whole part, but it is so interesting because it's almost impossible to kind of pull them apart from each other, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Are there some key things that you find yourself advising people and businesses on in terms of leadership for leaders? And so bringing it back to sort of this leading ladies idea, what are the differences that you see between male and female leaders? Is there any?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question.
Okay. Sometimes I think, men and women lead well or they don't. It's not necessarily a gender thing, that one is better than the other.
Yeah.
Does it just come back to having an open mindset, whoever you are?
Yes, because I don't want to kind of get into being specific about gender, because I think it can work both ways.
Yes,
there are positives and negatives of both. I think you're right to bring it back to mindset, because it is mindset. And that ability to be able to collaborate, to be able to inspire. We've all met one boss or a leader that has that ability to take the insurmountable challenge and turn it into something
and I think
amazing.
When you've worked for somebody like that, the impact they have on you as individuals in the business is really telling, and quite often it's telling when you're not there anymore. You realise, I was really good at that. They were really great at that leadership space. Is listening a quality that you find could be more widely embraced?
Listening is one of those hidden superpowers that when leaders and managers are able to become more conscious about their listening and actively listen.
It's listening, isn't it?
Be present without distractions and give their full focus. That has the power to be transformative. And
How do you actively listen, do you think?
Being fully present.
Okay.
Is the first part. So you are here. Your thought process is not somewhere else.
You're not distracted by something else. You put your phone down.
Yeah, either physical distractions are away, but also mental distractions.
Okay.
Because our thought processes work at a much faster rate than the rate that we speak.
That is, and I think that is true. Yes. One of the things I've learned, and it takes no time at all, is to think before you speak. Rather than just come out. But actually, the time taken between thinking and saying something is almost instantaneous, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And I was going to say, there's a couple of other things on that.
Sorry.
If I may. So the first one is that actually when we truly listen to somebody, what does it feel like when somebody's given their full attention to us? It feels great. Why does it feel great? Because it doesn't happen very often, let's be fair, particularly in business when there's lots of things going on, particularly the more senior that you become, there's a lot of mental, space and all that sort of thing. But also it taps into our deep human need to feel significant, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel valued. And when we are able to give people the focus and to actively listen, it is so deeply powerful at a human level. It has the potential to create much greater levels of engagement, of motivation, all of those things, and discretionary effort.
Greater trust as well in the organisation, because that's a really big thing for me. I think that you have that level of trust in your leadership.
Definitely. So on this point, just building on this, there are two different ways in which we process information. Yeah. And this links to how we listen and how we communicate. There are those of us that feel very comfortable talking to think, so formulating our ideas as we are talking. And there are those of us that like to think, to talk, and process the information, what's been said, process what we're going to say and how we're going to respond before we speak. Within a group dynamic, whenever I've asked this question, a large proportion of people are the think to talkers. So actually want to process information first and have that little bit of space just to formulate and make sense of before they communicate. Okay. So I think that's just really interesting from a leadership perspective, because often we feel very comfortable just, and we want to
giving people that space. It doesn't have to be very long, does it, for people to formulate some ideas? Yeah. We're talking about how quick your brain works and reacts. Yeah. Can people change themselves from being a think to talk, or to a talk
to think?
Yeah. I think I've probably changed, I'm not sure which way, but I think I've changed my thought processes. So
I think it can be contextual. Different environments might bring out different. In some instances, you might feel more comfortable just launching into talking and processing your information. Maybe it's about an area that you feel very comfortable with.
It's automatic, isn't it?
Whereas if it's something else, you might require a bit more thinking time first.
I think that's a really interesting thing for leaders to consider, is allowing people to think. Yeah. Maybe allowing them to prepare. Tomorrow, meeting at 9:00, we're going to be looking at this. Come with some thoughts.
Yeah, and just... giving the preparation can be so helpful for those people that like to process before contributing.
And the people that don't need that will just turn up anyway. Yeah. But it's creating the space for those sort of people that just like to do it the other way.
That's right. Creating an inclusive environment.
What do you want to tell us, Claire, in your experience? What are the things that interest you in this world that you find really, when you go to a company or to an individual, what is it that really sort of inspires you and gets you turning up every day to their door? What are those topics that really engage with you?
Oh, what a lovely, lovely question. I love to create an environment where people learn about themselves, become more confident and much more collaborative in what they're doing. And if I'm able to have the opportunity to create that within business, that is what I absolutely love to do. Okay. And that can be in various different guises.
Okay, and tell us what that means for you in those different guises then.
Yeah, I mean, it can be one-to-one. It can be within a group dynamic. It can be within a team. It can be across functions where you want to foster more collaboration. So much of it is underpinned, particularly within a group dynamic, with creating that space of psychological safety, that ability for people to show up and contribute in a way that feels in alignment with who they are, but also that they feel like they can challenge, give feedback, have different ideas, and not get shot down for that. Actually, that it's a positive kind of cultivating space where they can learn and contribute and work together collaboratively.
Have you found sort of post-lockdown I think our working worlds have changed now.
Yes.
There are some habits that were formed there,
definitely,
for want of a better word, that are still continuing and are going to continue in some form or another anyway, aren't they? We're never going back to pre-lockdown, I don't think.
No. And
so has that, and you talked about collaboration and groups and dynamics, getting people to work together.
Yeah.
Are you finding that companies, individuals are coming to your teams, coming to you to talk about those challenges?
Definitely.
Because the world is smaller, because you can be anywhere now and be part of a team at the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So, which I think is an upside, actually. There are some good things about that. But how do you get people to think about managing this much more sort of remote team dynamic?
Yeah, so I've definitely observed through the organisations that I've worked with in the pandemic and throughout the other side that people love the natural habitat generally. Not everyone, but actually a lot of people actually prefer working from home. So it's quite hard to get people together unless the leadership within organisations is very sort of pro and encouraging and very active and also present themselves within those organisations as well, and really encouraging that environment and the benefits of that. Because let's face it, yes, working remotely and collaborating remotely is possible, and it's amazing that we can do that on a global scale now with technology. But getting people together in person to be able to strategize, to collaborate, to come up with ideas, you can go so much deeper when you do that in person than what you can do online.
And I think it's factoring those important factors within that space in a much more sort of remote environment, isn't it?
Yeah.
That still has to be there somehow.
Yeah.
So how you put that in your business with some of the challenges of how people are choosing to work. And I really liked your phrase, natural habitat, because it's not one I hear very often. People talk about the working from home thing. And for me, working from home has so many different connotations. But if you talked about natural habitat, I think it makes you think differently about why people are wanting to do that. It turns it round a bit.
Yeah.
You know, working from home has got some very rigid, not such great connotations around it, hasn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
But if you talked about people are much more comfortable in the natural habitat for all sorts of reasons, and then I think it changes maybe you're thinking about how you might utilise that better in your businesses.
And it's all about, as a leader and as a manager, it is all about how you can get the best out of your people and understanding what is going to enable them to thrive. Some people love to be around other people. I'm an extrovert. I love to be around people. So I found it so hard in the pandemic. And actually, I co-founded a global community through the pandemic. We are Powerful Creators. Yeah, which we only did, me and my co-founder, we did for about 18 months through the pandemic. But that was my way and her way of getting that connection to others from a global perspective. It's our duty as leaders to really understand what's going to get the best out of our people and adapt our styles accordingly, shape towards that.
And it's back, I think, to the thing that you opened with earlier, which was this open mindset.
If you think about the entrepreneurial mindset, just kind of linking back to that, actually the open mind, the growth mindset, which is so much of what we are talking about, in fact, the entrepreneurial mindset just builds from those two mindsets, the open mind, the growth mindset. Yeah. So the growth mindset is all about yourself. This is about how you can make yourself better through learning, through trying new things, through getting feedback, but being open-minded around all of that. Whereas the entrepreneurial mindset is about taking the outside and bringing it in. So what's out there that I can learn from, and how can that help my business or my team or the project or whatever we're working on? How can that help us to progress in different ways that give us an advantage? So they all kind of link together.
So there's one thing before we finish about that, we want to come back to that kind of Karen's idiot guide for using generative AI in a personal and more meaningful way. That would be great to hear about that. But I'm sitting here thinking, and, you know, one of the challenges I think business faces at the moment is talent within its organisation. Yeah. And I mean talent from both ends of the spectrum here. And, you know, as I'm sort of getting onto that big number next year, I see the pressures from society, and I think the world that we're living in is not the same as it used to be in terms of how your own personal working life is structured. School, university, potentially school, work, retirement. Yeah. I probably simplified it too much. But I don't think there's any certainty around.
No.
Certainly not the last bit. I think the world has changed so much, and we have so many pressures on us as individuals, and the ability to live like our remembered parents, grandparents did. Yeah. It's a world away. Yeah. So the companies that we're building now and this use of generative AI, it's not just a young person's game, is it?
No, definitely not.
So I'm sitting here trying to think how companies could utilise this world better in terms of the young talent, marrying it and the environment better with the experienced people in their organisations, because people are going to want to most likely stay around longer. Yeah. Yeah. And so how do you get that working environment where it's wonderful when you've got new starters, new talent, working your way through your career, learning off experienced people? I just find that we're in danger of focusing on one end and not the other. And is there a way that this, a bit of a bugbear of mine, this whole age thing, by the way, as you might have gathered, but that this can help solve some of those more, not societal problems, but the potential of running up against finding the right talent, boxing it up because that's what talent is meant to look like. Whereas can generative AI help upskill? We could use it ourselves to be better prepared. So it's not just a company thing. There is something here that we have to do. I think there might be some solutions or ways of thinking that might help people think about, what am I going to do next? What do I find myself at 60? Yeah. I need to have a different load of skill sets. How do I get those? And how can I still make myself relevant for companies to retain me and work with the younger talent? Can you bring that back to how businesses need to change and how we could be using some things to perhaps start to think about that?
Well, the relevancy piece, if we start there, we all want to remain as relevant as possible, don't we?
But I think for me, and you talked about it earlier, how our brain, if we don't use it, the default setting, I know my default setting can be quite lazy, if I'm totally honest with you. I have to fight against that. I'm conscious for all sorts of reasons of wanting to be mentally active and add value to things. It doesn't just stop because we've had a construct before that says that's what you do and then you stop. So I think for me it's also about that learning thing in your head that you need to keep doing.
Definitely. It's about being curious and a lifelong learner. Knowing that there's always more stuff to learn. There's always things that are going to change. And actually, the more that we can be curious around those things, the more relevant we are going to become. Obviously, AI literacy is a component of that. The more comfortable that we get with using this language, with using these types of platforms, the more it just becomes ubiquitous in our day-to-day lives, the more then we are going to feel like we are able to contribute in a way that's relevant to these times now.
And is that something that businesses could do better, perhaps with certain areas, whether it's younger people, whether it's older people, creating that space for them to sort of learn that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a fantastic company called General Purpose who do training for everyone, actually, around generative AI. And how to really harness that, not only for yourself as an individual, but also within business. Okay. Yeah, so those guys are fantastic. We'll put them in the notes.
We'll definitely put that on. Yeah. But so Claire's cheat sheet for Karen. For use of generative AI, which at the moment is not being fully utilised. You talked about that earlier, saying in real time.
Yes, so that's a really important thing. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the word hallucination when it comes to generative AI. And what that means is that generative AI is obviously pulling all of the data from the internet that's available and coming up with a solution based on what you ask it, essentially. Okay. Sometimes that information is not factually correct, and it's called a hallucination. So when you prompt in and you say something like in real time, what that's asking it to do is to go and source the internet and come back with reference points, links, hyperlinks to the information to say that it is a source that is out there and that is current, as relevant as it can be right now.
Okay.
So that real-time thing is really key, particularly if you're doing research.
Is there anything else we should know, do you think? Or I'm taking that away as a big nugget, by the way, so that's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, asking ChatGPT for 5 ways in which generative AI can help your business.
Okay.
Can start you thinking, give you ideas for ways in which you might start to experiment with how to use it. In different ways. The critique aspect that I mentioned earlier, these were some things that I learned at General Purpose, actually, in one of their workshops. But asking for recommendations for things and then asking GPT to critique those and come back with a more robust set of examples. And that can be really interesting from a critical thinking perspective and give you different angles around certain things. Asking it to be a persona. So if you're writing to a particular person, say, for example, I want to write to a CTO, can you give me 3 points for what's going to be really topical and the type of language to use.
Okay.
Again, just simple things like that can be really, really helpful to get you seeing things differently.
Thank you. I love talking to you. I never know where the time goes, but I'll finish with, so what's next for you? What are you focusing on? Is it a place that you want to take your business, or have you found your real sweet spot now, do you think, Claire?
Oh, thank you for asking that question, Karen. I've definitely have found the sweet spot in terms of I feel so lucky that I get to do what I love every single day and work with amazing clients. So I feel so lucky that I'm able to do that. The next phase for me is around integrating more technology into the business. So that is part of the future vision and growing the team and growing the business.
Well, I've loved talking to you today. I'm not sure what we're going to call this podcast, but there are so many things we've talked about, but we'll find a great hook for this. Thank you once again. We will make sure that all our listeners have your details, they know where to find you. Amazing. We'll put General Purpose on there. And if there's anything else you wanted us to share before it goes live, then we will do so. But a huge thank you very much, Claire, for appearing on the Leading Ladies podcast.
Oh, amazing. Thank you, Karen, for the opportunity to come and speak to you and your listeners. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.